Hi, my name is Chuck Joel with Management Technologies. Today we're going to take a look at the P&ID Modeler in Revit. The P&ID Modeler in Revit is designed to allow us to link our Revit model to a plant P&ID project and to be able to leverage some of that data as we're building a new model. Excuse me. So I've got a Revit project set up here, and I just want to cover a few things so that you're aware of the setup that is involved. The first thing you'll see is a P&ID Modeler tab over on the right side of my screen. And if this tab or if this panel is not displayed on your computer, it will display when you select the P&ID Modeler command in the ribbon tabs on the Systems tab. It's going to open up the browser that allows me to look at collaboration projects. The requirement for the P&ID Modeler to work is the Plant P&ID project has to exist in the cloud. It has to be in Autodesk Docs. It has to be a collaboration project. The Revit model does not need to be, but the Plant project does. So to find my plant project, I need to select the ACC hub that I'm working from. I'm going to select the Autodesk Docs project where my plant projects reside. And you can see inside of this Docs project, I actually have two plant projects. So I'm going to select the appropriate one here. And I'm going to click to open the project. I'm going to tell the software to link to that project, and it was just telling me that I had been linked to another project previously in that message. And so what it does is you can only be linked to one P&ID project at a time. Technically, your model could link to different P&ID projects and create the model or the information all in the same Revit model, but you can only connect to one at a time. The P&ID Modeler tool panel now shows me the P&ID drawings that are in that project that I've connected to. And if I select it and click Next, it's going to give me a preview of the P&ID drawing as well as a list of which line numbers are in that P&ID. I can select each line number in the P&ID. You can see it kind of zooms in there so I can see it a little bit better. But when I click Next, it's going to develop a list of content that goes into that. And so you're going to see the equipment in here. And as I hover over the pump, you're seeing it kind of highlight on screen. So normally it's green, but when I hover over it, it shows in a blue color. Doesn't really show up as well as it possibly could, but this allows me to see this information in the context of the preview that I'm seeing up above. Okay, I want to create this or these model elements in the Revit side of things, but I need to tell the P&ID modeler what Revit objects correspond to the P&ID objects that you have in your P&ID drawing. And so there's some content and some configuration that goes into that. In the project manager on the left side of my screen, I've got a piping system which corresponds to the services in your P&IDs. And I've got that set up with a specific naming convention, and I'll show you why that's important in a moment. For pipe types, I've got a pipe type there with a naming convention, again, that kind of matches up with what's in there, or in the P&ID project, as well as then the pipe accessories that I'll need, the equipment that I'll need to be able to create the model to match our P&ID. Okay. There's one additional piece. I'm going to switch over to the Manage tab and go into Project Parameters, and you're going to see a property in Revit for tag from the P&ID. Everything that you create in your P&ID drawing is going to have a tag associated with it. I am going to be able to bring that tag information into the Revit model content, but I have to have a shared parameter set up to be able to support that, and that's what this is for. With everything set up properly, I can simply now use the P&ID Modeler panel, and I can select the equipment that I need to put in there. And it's telling me, well, before you can do that, you need to specify your part mappings. So the part that I attempted to skip over is once I've connected to a project, I need to set up the mappings between P&ID content or information and Revit content or information. So the P&ID services and a Revit system type are equivalent between the two softwares. You can see here that the Revit system for CWS cooling water supply is automatically mapping itself to a service in the P&ID project that has a similar name, but the syntax or the naming conventions aren't the same. This is something that isn't very well, or isn't very consistent, I should say. You can see this automatically made the association, but it also associated that Revit system type with ethylene refrigerant. Maybe not what I wanted it to be, but I can click in that cell and I can select something else from that list if I need to. You can do this if the situation doesn't find a match to the service, and I can assign it to whatever specific system type I have in Plant or in the Revit model to support that. Now, manual overrides like this or manual settings like this can be lost when switching between different P&ID projects, or if you lose the connection to a P&ID project. So anytime you have to set one of these manually, you potentially will have to reset it at some point. That's why you want, as much as possible, to be able to have this automatic mapping established. And that means we need to set the configurations up in your P&ID model template and your Revit model template so that these objects are similar in name so that they find that relationship or they find that potential match for us automatically to limit our need to do a lot of manual work in here. In addition to system types, we've got to do object mapping. You can see my primary line segment, Revit pipe type, has matched up with my P&ID process line symbol definition. Okay, this is something that will probably, well, not probably, will need to change because I'm talking about a Revit pipe type. That Revit pipe type is going to tell me what the material is, what the class or the schedule is, what the fitting types are. A process line, primary line segment in P&ID doesn't do that. But in order to be able to model the pipe properly in Revit from the P&ID, I'm going to have process line symbols that are set up for those different types of pipe. I might have a carbon steel class 150 flanged. I might have a stainless steel class 350 flanged, or maybe a ductile iron class 250 with mechanical joints. So the setup in both of the softwares are going to need to be massaged or configured in such a way that we create these matches wherever possible. And I set some of this stuff up in advance, but I only set up some of it. So you'll notice that there are some things that still need to be done. Pipe accessories. When it comes to your pipe accessories, there are mappings that have to happen here. In this case, I'm working with a valve, and you can see that my gate valve has automatically mapped itself to a gate valve that I have inside of the Revit project. So I don't need to deal with that anymore. But I can also do my pipe fittings and my pipe specialty items, right? Those all go to different Revit families, whether it's a pipe accessory, a pipe fitting. We just need to make that or create that relationship or that mapping, if you will. And then finally, property mapping. This is that Revit property that I talked about earlier that we need. And what I'm seeing here is that this tag P&ID, for whatever reason, didn't pick up the relationship of the Revit property to the Plant P&ID property. So I have to set this manually. Now, this is and can be inconsistent. In some other examples, when I was doing a dry run of this presentation, one of them did and one of them didn't. So Autodesk has provided a tool here that really can be quite helpful, but maybe doesn't check all the boxes for what we need. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and OK out of those settings, and I should now be ready to model. So I'm going to add my pump. And you want to be careful with this insertion tool, because once it starts the insertion process, it kind of reverts over to Revit settings at this point. And Revit will allow me to place multiples of these. And if I do that, the P&ID modeler really doesn't care. It shows me that, you know, the pump's been added. It gives me that green icon there. But I have two pump P115s in my project now. And that really shouldn't be. I'm going to go ahead and just delete that one. And I'm going to show you that now if I go and select to add this pump again, it doesn't give me that option. It just takes me to that pump that's in the Revit model. So it's something that you have to make sure that you establish in your workflow that you're doing this in the correct way. Otherwise, it's not going to work the way that you would expect it to or want it to. Let me zoom out a little bit here. I'm going to go ahead and add my equipment in next. And I'm giving myself a fair amount of separation here because I want to add my piping in, and then I'm going to need to add my valve in to that piping after the fact. So you can see that both of the pieces of equipment are in. It's figuring that or seeing that information. If I select my equipment, you can see that the tag P&ID property is pulling the information from the P&ID model. Now, if I want to start routing the pipe in, when I select that pipe segment in the P&ID Modeler, it's going to start the pipe tool. It's going to select the right pipe type definition inside of Revit. So I'm going to model with the right piping configuration. But everything else is the standard piping in Revit. And so, you know, setting the diameter or setting the elevation, those are all part of that. I'm going to start from the pump here. I'm going to make my connection to it. And I want the pipe starting point or elevation point and the diameter to match. And so I'm going to use Revit's capability to match the diameter and the elevation here. And you see it has changed the diameter to 1.25 inches and the starting elevation to 39 and some change. That elevation is good, and I can change the elevation now to basically rise up from the top of that pump at that connection point to a 9-foot elevation. But what's problematic is the connection points on my equipment is 1.25 inches, and the P&ID says I need 6-inch. And so that's one of the things that when you're doing this, you need to make sure that your equipment has the right connection points in it to support the P&ID. And I haven't set these up with that information in it yet. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to force it to be a 6-inch. And then I'm going to start routing that pipe. I'm going to align it with the top of the tank and the connector there. And then just make the connection into the top of the tank. Okay. You'll see something interesting here. It made the connection, but it changed the diameter of the pipe. Right? So even though I had that ability from the pipe routing in Revit, I could start at the connection point on the tank. I could transition immediately to a 6-inch diameter, and it would put a fitting in at the connector on the tank. With this modeling tool, it won't give you that connection until the first transition. And so our 3D model now shows us the piping as being 1.25 inches coming out of the top of both the pieces. And then once we get through that first transition, it changes to the 6-inch. The weird thing about this is this doesn't show up as being an issue. Okay. I'm going to back up a step here. Get rid of that pipe. I'm going to redo that step. I'm going to acquire both the diameter and the elevation. I'm going to change my offset and connect my pipe in. And you'll notice a difference in the P&ID Modeler palette. It's showing me that my pipe is in, but I have a mismatch The P&ID is calling for 6-inch. I've only got 1.25 inches. Okay. We'll take a look at that more in a moment. I'm going to switch into a 3D view here, and I'm going to go ahead and grab and drop a valve in here. And as you know, the valves in Revit out of the box are, most of them are set to be size based in the family type as opposed to matching the diameter of the pipe that you're inserting them in. So in this case, I can select the correct pipe size or the right connection size if it exists in that content. So again, just like the mechanical equipment, the pipe accessory would need to be modified to have that. That, or you can modify your valves inside of Revit to match the pipe size. I never quite understood why Autodesk created the content the way they did. Fittings will match the pipe size unless you change them, but the accessories don't. So, in any event, it added all that information in. You can see that the gate valve, because it came in as a 6-inch size because the family had it, it shows as being properly inserted and complete. Obviously, I've got some issues with the piping. I would have to address that. One of the things that I did want to point out is changing the diameter of pipe in the Revit model is a little bit more complicated than changing the pipe diameter of your process lines in P&ID. When I select all of the piping here, or most of the piping, but I've got pipe segments, I've got pipe accessories, and I've got pipe fitting selected, I don't have the option through the ribbon tab, or I should say the I don't have the option of changing the diameter, not even inside of the properties palette, and that's because I've got objects of different types selected. Even though they all have a diameter, Revit doesn't support changing their diameter in a mass selection like this. So you would have to go through and you would have to filter out the different object types and then try and change their size with the appropriate tools, right? So it makes sense to, have all of this stuff the right size first. Well, if you put something in like this and then it changes in the P&ID, then I got to make some changes to the model anyway. Sometimes it makes the most sense just to get rid of your piping or disconnect it from your equipment and then modify the equipment for the connection sizes. There's a lot of things that you're going to run into there. It isn't, or there isn't a parametric connection between the model and the P&ID. If the P&ID changes, I can see those changes in the P&ID modeler when I get back into the Revit model. But if I change something in the Revit model, it doesn't register in the P&ID drawings at all. So you got to be a little bit familiar with the capability of the tools, and that needs to be built into your workflow. Okay, I'm just going to save this off here for a moment. And then I'm going to switch over to the plant model. Again, this is a web-based or Autodesk Docs-based project. And I'm going to open the project up and I'm going to change or re-tag, if you will, the piping in there so that it's 1.25 inches instead of the 6-inch that was in here previously. Everything's going to update here. All I need to do is close out of the drawing, which is going to save it and check it back into the project. Once I've checked it back into the project, it's updating the project, and so the P&ID project is different, right? Give this a moment to process. And then if I go back to the Revit model in the P&ID modeler, it's not seeing that change. It requires a model refresh, and the only way to really do that is to close the model in Revit and reopen it. And I am using a model that is in the cloud, so it is prompting me to synchronize with Central, so a little bit of an extra step here. So let it finish all of that. I'm going to reopen it. And when I reopen the model, it's still not going to look any different or say anything any different because it needs to reread the P&ID data. So as soon as I open up the model again, it's going to go in and you can see it's reloading the project or rereading the data. And then I'll be able to see where those changes occurred. Okay. Select the P&ID, click Next. Select the line number, click Next. And you'll see that now the pipe sections are showing as being properly inserted, the correct size and everything. But my gate valve is off because, again, the gate valve was already in here. It was a 6-inch size. And I don't have an 1.25 inch, so no matter what I do until I change that content, it's going to be incorrect. But that's how the P&ID modeler will allow me to leverage data and information in my P&IDs to create the 3D model in Revit and how it's going to allow you to see where there may be discrepancies between the two. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you very much. Have a great day.